Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Daniel Heller, head of the Cancer Nanomedicine Laboratory at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, the academic director of Accelerating Bioventure Innovation at Weill Cornell Medical Center, and a serial co-founder of startups out of his laboratory.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We're thrilled you're back with us for another installation of our NewYorkBIO virtual breakfast series. This month is sponsored by TriNet, and we've announced a new partnership with TriNet. They are an HR resource partner. So be sure and check our website out. It has lots of information about the new partnership. Today, we have a very special guest. Dan Heller is with us, and we're going to talk lots and lots and lots of things, all things cancer, things MSK, things coronavirus. We are going to cover the waterfront with him. And without further ado, I always forget this. One other item, the way you ask questions, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. So feel free to put your questions in either of those, and Derek and I will filter those and get them over to Dan during our conversation. So with that out of the way, I'll turn it over to Derek to introduce our special guest.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And Dan, thank you so much for being here. Since you have attended these before, you know the way that this starts, and we like to talk a little bit about where you came from and how you got where you are. And I would say that you probably have really the classic tried and true path from getting into a faculty position. Would you say that? Really the standard totally that everyone goes through.
Yeah, very, very common.
So you did a history degree, and then you taught middle school science, right? It's the classic proving ground for all great scientists. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about—
if you want to do science, you got to teach middle school first.
At least to get the patience that you need to do science.
Awesome. I think so why don't we postdocs are a lot easier sometimes.
So why don't we start with this? So talk to us a little bit about how one gets from a middle school science teacher to be, a professor at Sloan Kettering.
Well, I feel like a widening path is a good path because it really teaches you a lot along the way, and they say you can't connect the dots going forward, you can just look backwards, and so I'll attempt to do that. So I was as an undergrad, I started doing chemistry demonstrations at the local science museum, and that kind of got me into the liking teaching. The classes didn't really make me like science very much, but by doing chemistry demonstrations with liquid nitrogen, I like the teaching. But I was a history major, but I realized that I was in Texas at the time, and it's easier to get a position as a science teacher than a history teacher, pretty much anywhere. In Texas, you have to be a history teacher, you also have to be the football coach. And so then so 2 years teaching was great. Actually, I had a great time teaching middle school. My second year, I realized that I was teaching all the same stuff again, but then the students were different, and that made me realize that maybe intellectually it would start to get a little bit repetitive by maybe my 10th year. Even though I knew I wasn't the teacher I really wanted to be, it probably would take me 10 years to be that. So, but I loved it. But I decided maybe I should, now that I've been teaching the science, maybe I should go and and practice it. It was that fun to teach it. So I started taking post-baccalaureate classes in chemistry, and did research for a year in about 2 university labs and a company all simultaneously, to kind of prove to myself that I could do science, and probably prove to some other people too that I could get into grad school. So I went to the University of Illinois in chemistry, and I worked in carbon nanomaterials with a terrific chemical engineering faculty, and that was kind of the first time that carbon nanotubes were found to be fluorescent, and around that time, and I worked on the basic optical properties of carbon nanotubes, but we realized maybe they could be sensors, and so my professor got stolen by MIT. We moved the lab there, and eventually I came into contact with Bob Langer's lab, which kind of drew me into this world of entrepreneurship. And so that's been that's some of the dots connecting that winding path.
Do you ever find that the idea of trying to explain science to a 7th or an 8th grader helps in terms of trying to explain what you do to either, anyone that asks you, or even kind of an investor or during a presentation? Is there a level of kind of basic conveyance that you kind of have either mastered or that kind of transcends 8th grade science?
Oh, absolutely. I could say lots of things that might hit someone the wrong way, so I won't. About if you can teach teach a 7th or 8th grader, then it's great to be able to teach, talk about your science to fill in the blank.
Lawyer.
I was thinking more. Never mind, I won't say it. So, but no, actually, it's great to be able to think about a couple things. One is a 7th and 8th grader, they're still interested in kind of how the world works and haven't been jaded enough to just think about grades, so it's nice. But I'll be talking about how plants work, and talking about the sun shines on them, and they're like, wait, but how do the suns shine? And now I have to put on my nuclear physics hat, but it's great to be able to to realize that it's all connected. There's not just the plant unit, and that's separate from how the sun shines. And so that's great, but also just being able to think about your science and say, well, how did I explain science to a 7th grader, 8th grader? Well, I can't go too deep into nanomaterial jargon, because no one's going to understand that. And just thinking about that, and not and not thinking that everybody else in the world loves single-walled carbon nanotubes as much as I do, and drug delivery nanoparticles. I know you guys do.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good perspective to take into a lot of things. There's when you find yourself too deeply in the weeds, and then you look up and you realize the person you're explaining it to has not followed you for the last little while, it's probably good to have that level of both awareness and the ability to kind of come back up to 10,000 feet.
Absolutely.
So you find yourself at MIT, and this guy Bob Langer, I don't know how long he's been there or anything like that. That seems like an okay place to collaborate. But as we were talking, you talked a little bit about being a part of the MIT 100K business plan competition too. And I walk us through that a little bit. I think many of our audience will probably have heard it. Why don't you give us a little context around what the contest is and how it works?
So it's an entrepreneurship competition. It allows teams to form and pitch, and do a pitch, kind of like an investor pitch. But many of these people are graduate students, postdoc, and a lot of them are, and they allow MBAs into it. And so MIT has a business school, and so there's often a nice pairing. And when these teams form, it's great when there's a mix. That if everybody's just that's in a team is pipetting all day, that's probably not the best mix. It's good to have an MBA student there, but it's mostly but mostly young people, but doing these investor pitches, and some of them are the inventors and are MIT postdocs or students who invented something and think that they can there's a potential to move the technology they made to the clinic or to the market. But it really this competition didn't start as 100K. It started as much less money. So it's been going on for a long time, and it's known, and it really just has a lot built around it, so that people kind of get someone like me at that time, and I was a pipetter shooting lasers, and it came into this the idea that, okay, what is this entrepreneurship stuff? And it just gives us a crash course of what entrepreneurship is, and a little bit of the jargon, not enough to make us dangerous, but well, except to ourselves, and to make us think, maybe there's something here that we should be thinking about in terms of how to bring a technology to the marketplace. And it would also bring in just a lot of attention, and there would be investors there, and by the end of the competition, you'd get the top winner, the top prize, but a lot of other people along the way who actually had pitched something really well, because they get a lot of practice and a lot of information and a lot of mentorship from people in the community. And by the end, oftentimes the top prize winner, the one that wins 100K, isn't actually the big winner. It might be one of the others who some investor sees there, and they get a lot of interest, and or a few of the others. So every year, companies spin out from this, and it's really done a lot. And one of the and so I was in a team that did this. My technology was part of the work that I did in my graduate school. It happened that one of the other kind of leaders of a team, I guess CEO types, who was an MBA student and an MD, and his team didn't make it to the next round, but ours did. So he jumped to our team, and suddenly we got this CEO quality guy. I mean, just really good quality CEO running our team, and we shot up there. We did so much better than we probably deserved in terms of our technology at the time. It just wasn't developed that far. Yeah. And then I realized, wow, when you get one of these type of people who can really just, sell, it's amazing. And eventually, he reached the end with our team, and then the next round, his team came back into play. That company became what's now known as, actually even back then was known as Podometrics, and the guy John Bloom is doing really well in Boston. So it was just amazing to learn from someone like that and realize, wow, there's some qualities that I really didn't pick up by pipetting.
and your first experience poaching in the biotech world.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, but yes.
Yeah, unintentionally, but nonetheless.
Our business model was unchanged. However, we now have this guy.
We'll just bask.
Yeah. Whatever works. So how did you find yourself, how did you find yourself coming to Sloan Kettering and actually getting into cancer?
Yeah, so in Bob's lab, definitely there's a big focus on cancer. Most of his lab space is actually in the Cancer Institute, the Koch Institute at MIT, and so I was definitely exposed to cancer research. Really, the first cancer paper I wrote was a review paper, because we thought, well, it's really a good thing to try to write something like that to really synthesize a lot of information real quick. So that was great. But when I was looking at faculty positions, like many people have gone through his lab before, I thought, okay, well, I'm an engineer, I'm a chemist PhD, but I was really always trained in engineering labs, so I'll go apply to become faculty at the chemistry department, but also mostly engineering schools. And then I was at a conference, and I met someone, my future department head from Sloan Kettering, Dave Scheinberg, who's amazing, and also an academic entrepreneur himself. But at the time, he looked at my poster at this conference, and he said, "Have you thought about?" He said, "Are you looking for faculty positions?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Have you thought about Sloan Kettering?" And I thought, "No, what's that?" I mean, I'm from New York. I knew it was a cancer hospital, but I just didn't know at the time about all the biomedical research here in this area of New York, which is where I am now, right across from the cancer hospital and Weill Cornell. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'll apply, but I really assumed I would go to a engineering school. But in the end, I realized as things were happening, and I got the faculty position, that wow, if I was an engineer surrounded by other engineers, which is great, but if I'm an engineer my lab is surrounded by people who really understand disease and problems and medicine and biology, I would be maybe a little bit out of feeling out of place, maybe initially, but it would be a great place to really understand the problems that I want to solve. So that's where we are. We're kind of a bunch of engineers sitting in a medical center and trying and collaborating just very promiscuously, just talking to so many doctors and biologists, and it's just amazing to be in that sort of position.
Yeah. And you've also managed to get yourself into maybe not exactly the MIT $100,000 pitch competition, but you've been fortunate enough not only to play with some startups out of your own lab, which we'll talk about, but also be a big part of the accelerating bioventures innovation program at Cornell, which is really, we can talk about this for a while, but it's been a great program for the city, and it really does an excellent job of kind of giving a lot of the graduate students and postdocs a great flavor of either what it means to start a company or what it would take to take where they're going with their innovations to actually get them to patients.
Exactly. No, it's been really exciting to be working to be working in that space.
Yeah. So you've been in New York now for about 8 years, right?
Correct.
And so what were some of your impressions when you first got here in terms, you coming out of Langer's lab and being really kind of ensconced in everything that everyone sees Langer's lab as kind of the hallowed ground of innovation. What were some of your first impressions when you came to New York?
Well, I'm from here originally, but I was gone for quite a while until I moved back to start my faculty position in 2012, and coming from Bob's lab and Cambridge, as it's bustling and growing in the entrepreneurship world, I then showed up in New York and realized, wow, this is really not Boston. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start my lab, and hopefully, if things go well and I get lucky, then something will spin out of my lab, and we'll be able to start a startup or two, and we'd be able to try to get something to clinical trials, because it's very hard to do that sitting just in the academic lab. And so that was the goal. And in New York, I realized that well, at the time there was very little, short 8 years ago it feels, but there was very little lab space in the New York area. Harlem Biospace was just about opening at that point. Alexandria Center wasn't here. These various the Varick Street Incubator, these things weren't here yet. So I was feeling like, is there something I can do to help this ecosystem? Just coming with pure energy and nothing else really. But seeing what Bob has done and what's been happening in Cambridge, is there something I could help with? And so that was definitely the thought, like, how do I help the ecosystem? And geez, the ecosystem needs some help.
Yeah, I think at that point, I don't know if the Alexandria Center was a hole in the ground, but it was definitely it was definitely not active. And I think it's interesting. I look back here because I've been in New York since 2006, and I look back and the amazing progress that you see over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, where you see more and more things opening up immediately. Actually, the groundwork for all of those things really probably started to be laid around 2010, 2012, and it just took long enough for all of these things now to come to fruition. So you kind of came in really just as that wave was starting. And I think one of the challenges, and I think the things that people take for granted about Boston, is that those kind of a lot of the relationships are already there and have been there for a long time, right? Every venture capitalist knows which hallway and which building Bob Langer's lab is in, because they kind of line up outside the door to see if they can talk to him. Here, those relationships in a lot of ways are still being formed, because we have more capital kind of coming out of the woodwork now. It's funny, there's a good story about how Moderna got started, and I don't have to go through the whole thing, but basically Bob Langer met with the scientist that had created the invention, and after about 15 minutes they went through a couple questions, and Langer was so excited he literally said, "Get up and come with me." They walked across the street to Newbar's office at Flagship, and Langer sat down and he said, "You need to fund this right now." And he did. I mean, I don't think they all don't work like that, but
when I say that kind of thing,
but it's,
you're like, come with me for a
there are not that many people, you can count the number of people in the world on one hand who can start and end a pitch meeting by you need to fund this right now and not be shown the door by security, right? And actually have it work. But I think a lot of those things now are, I think those things, I know those things have gotten much, much better.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, when you look at it back through the lens of how things have changed over the last 8 years, certainly in your position, you know, I think you probably can see a little bit of the shift, you know, have some of the, has the ability to get kind of traction on either discussions or innovations or pitch meetings or anything like that. Do you feel like that's gotten easier?
I feel like there's definitely, you know, I feel like there's been more. New York has had more movement. Definitely, it feels better than it did 8 years ago. You know, personally, I feel like, hey, I'm talking to you, Derek. So I'm, you know, for me, things are getting better. So not, you know, rocketing, but hey, but I feel like it's no, I feel like New York, you know, if we can raise all boats in New York, things are good. The ecosystem has been feeling better, partially because of the lab space. I think some of the lab space brought investors and vice versa, and so that's been great. Certainly, we've got a long way to go compared to a place like Boston or the West Coast, but I feel like we definitely have our own take on things. Certainly, maybe people are a little bit less more risk averse here. But I feel like, you know, there's definitely been some movement. I don't know if it's at all with anything related to anything I've done. I feel like it's really just kind of apart from me. I'm trying to help students to move things and medical institutions in our little corner here. But I feel like it's definitely been moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that we've seen, right? So one difference between Massachusetts and is they had one major, like one government, where we have city government and state government that both work together to do to support life sciences. But they also started about 20 years significantly investing state money in the biotech ecosystem in Massachusetts. And while we've had, you know, over $1 billion commitment between the state and the city for economic development, it just didn't start as soon. And so we're, you know, it's rational that we're not as far along as Boston, Cambridge. But of course, I think we're getting there. And I think we're our own unique ecosystem, which I'm sure you're seeing with the type of students that you have that want to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, the medical centers here are amazing. There's so much medical innovation here, biological innovation here. There's some engineering, not as much as in Boston, but there's just so much medical innovation here. And so research is really happening. Innovations are happening. I think there's been, you know, certainly the people in the PI as professors running labs don't have the same. There's not as many of them here that have the same ethos as in Boston, where they're saying, okay, how, you know, we know at least someone to talk to take our innovation out. Some of them are definitely moving their innovations out of the lab. I think proportionally, certainly not as many, but I think people are starting to see that's happening.
It's funny. I tend to shy away from the whole comparison between New York and Boston and San Francisco because they're all very different. And I think if New York grows into the best version of itself, whatever that happens to be, I think everybody's going to benefit because, you know, it's funny. People tend to mention Boston and San Francisco in the same breath. And if you walk around Cambridge and you walk around South San Francisco, those two places are not the same, and not even, you are very definitely in very different places. So I remain confident that New York is going to keep growing and is going to ultimately end up as really, I would say, the best version of itself. And I think that's going to be really helpful. Like you mentioned the academic medical centers, we have a tremendous base of patients, diverse groups of patients and different kinds of doctors and all sorts of things. So, you know, it's not going to surprise anybody that I'm bullish and confident about New York. So we had a question that I think is useful here to turn things back a little bit. You know, we had a question asking what kind of cancer are you focused on in your lab, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about the kind of things that your lab does focus on? What are, get us a little bit into the weeds and talk to us a little bit about, what kind of things you have going on.
I'll try to do the best with my and try to always think about those 7th and 8th graders, but
and the lawyers.
My dad's on the line, and he's an attorney too, so you're in good company. Usually I show him my research paper that just got published, and he said, "I think I understood one word in that title." So
he's proud of you. That's
hi, Ed. So my lab, I kind of an amalgam of my training in kind of nanomedicine and biomedical engineering in general. I kind of came here and said, well, my lab, some of my expertise is on the development of sensors, imaging agents, and detection, and then another area that I learned at Bob's lab was more about drug delivery, polymeric materials, materials for drug release, and so those have kind of been the technological basis of our lab. And when I started my lab in a medical center surrounded by, really, there's a lot of basic biologists here. Usually they start their lab saying, we have a question. What is, we have a hypothesis. We have an area of focus. We want to understand blah. And I said, kind of like a lot of other engineers, well, I'm coming here with a bunch of ideas of technologies that we could make. If we made sensors that could detect certain biomarkers and disease and do it in animals and people and measure things in real time with that, could we make something really cool and useful? Or if we made some certain nanomaterials to deliver drugs and prevent them to going to places where there's toxicities and improve targeting to certain body parts and organs and cancer, would that make a cool technology? Can we make a great technology out of that to address some problem? And so it was definitely a different feeling than when I arrived here. I wasn't surrounded by engineers, and I realized that was the difference. Was that I realized that the difference between an engineer and a basic scientist is that I wanted to make things and solve problems, but I didn't really have any hypotheses or particular questions about how to discover something in biology, and I realized that being around biologists, that's what they were thinking about. Like, how do we move the needle forward in the understanding of a disease or even a protein, and so it was it felt like a little bit of disconnect, that our goals were actually different. That was the big difference by coming in as an engineer. An engineer isn't someone that has a particular set of skills necessarily, but in medical or in biomedical engineering, sometimes it's just an idea of we're going to make technologies to solve problems. And so that's kind of what the feeling was, that, well, I'm kind of a fish out of water, in that someone asked me when I gave my whole presentation here at Sloan Kettering shortly after I got here about all what my lab is doing. They said, okay, well, you're making all this stuff. That's great, but where are you going with this? I mean, where am I going with this? Like, we're making technologies to solve problems. No, but like, what's your question? And the wrong answer to that question was probably what I said, which was, we don't have any questions. We only have answers. We don't have any problems. We only have solutions. So that's not the right way to answer it. And now my lab is, personally, and people in my lab maybe have taught me, because a lot of my students come in from more biological background, and now I could say, oh yeah, we have a particular question about X, Y, Z in biology, but oftentimes it's because we made a technology that could potentially address or help us ask that question. And so now we have biological questions because we made technologies that, for instance, some of our sensor technologies can be high throughput assays, and we're using them for drug discovery and also to investigate questions in basic biology. So now we're this very applied lab in terms of making stuff, but some of the stuff we're making are sensors to try to allow us to ask really basic questions in cancer biology. And so I kind of split up our work into, so to answer your question, we kind of split up our work into 3 different parts. One is exactly what I said, these sensors that are really assays, high throughput assays, or assays where we can put sensor inside of an animal to try to understand, say, some physiologic change or disease change, where we can monitor even drug action over time in an animal, and also discover drugs in using, say, cells. So we're and that kind of that ethos has kind of spun out one of our technologies and companies, which is, I guess, called Lipid Sense, but now it's called Lyme Therapeutics, about lipid metabolism.
Okay.
And then another area in our is about in our lab is making technologies to biosensors that work in vivo. So in people, can we do real-time monitoring or monitoring of disease markers in where maybe a disease marker, you try to take something out of the blood, like in the case of ovarian cancer, the disease markers in blood just don't reach the level that or really don't discriminate very well. So there's potentially good biomarkers in ovarian cancer, but it turns out that at least taking them out of the blood, they've not been able to distinguish to be used as a screening tool. So we've been asking questions like, can we implant a sensor into a person in a certain space that will get higher levels and earlier potential detection of these markers? And so that actually has spawned one of our other companies, NewYorkBIO's, headed by our CEO, Donna Rounds. And then we have another area which is about targeting drugs to spaces in the body and to disease. We do a lot of work in metastatic cancer and targeting drugs to brain cancers, actually, and getting materials across the blood vessels and into cancer cells and into tumor tissues. So we have a lot of blood vessel or cancer blood vessel targeted target therapeutics. And one thing that was totally surprising to us when we made some of these nanoparticles, we were trying to make, early on in my lab, we were trying to make particles that targeted the lungs for treating lung cancer. And we and one thing that also Bob says is that, luckily I didn't know enough, so I tried something. And what happened was we made these nanoparticles which were a certain size that we thought would be good for targeting lungs. And we looked at where they were going, and we realized that they were all going, almost pretty much all going to the kidneys. And we were like, the kidneys? How are we getting particles into the kidneys? And also, what is that useful for? And is that already done? And so we had no idea. And so we started, luckily, being in this place and surrounded by physicians and biologists, we started thinking like, okay, what are the kidneys useful for? Okay, or what could we do if we could target drugs to the kidney? And we started. I luckily found he'd recently come here at that time, the chief of the renal service at Sloan Kettering, Edgar Jaimes. I found him, and he had been working on chronic and acute kidney disease, and he sees a lot of the patients that have problems because cancer drugs have damaged their kidneys. And I said, what if we can target drugs to the kidney? And he said, well, that would be amazing for all this XY, every disease I work on pretty much. And I said, great, because we'd like to, we have something we think could work in that direction. We started working with him very closely and finding that this technology can target drugs to the kidneys. And so we definitely are working on metastatic cancer and targeting drugs to tumors a whole lot in our lab. But we realized that in order to try this kidney targeted technology out, we had to start a company, and very luckily, and I can tell the whole long story later, but we found Arthur Klausner, who's the CEO of Goldilocks Therapeutics, and he's the one who named that company as well, because a scientist would probably very rarely find put a fairy tale into it, but it turns out that these particles were the right size to target the kidneys, so he named it Goldilocks Therapeutics. And
just right.
Yeah,
so, just right.
When you can find the right CEO, they can find the right name too.
I do like that story, and I like the fact that you happen to be working with two of really my favorite people who have been around New York and are just exceptional. And I had been, I forget where I kind of panels and things together and on these early kind of startup things, and initially, but my initial perception of him was like, he he always had like three other angles that he's seen on most of these startups throughout his career, and he was like tended to be two levels ahead of thinking about whoever was pitching it, but also managed to kind of either ask questions or something in a way that was put a positive spin on everything that they were going, and went to like a good place with all that. Just he's just terrific. And Donna Rounds was the head of tech transfer at Hospital for Special Surgery for many years, and was at Columbia before that, and was just one of the most highly respected people in all of those fields, and just terrific. You could talk to her about literally any kind of technology under the sun, and she would not only have a great idea of what you were talking about, and be super insightful. So you have landed two exceptional people to work with. And as we talked before, that's hard to do, right? It's a
Right.
difficult nut to crack, because it's not like when you first start a company you can advertise a large salary or anything like that. It's actually really, really difficult to find good people to work with in that kind of situation.
Exactly. And I was just very lucky to find them. And I should say the Lyme Therapeutics is actually is incubated within my lab, but my postdoc Parker Jenna, it has been kind of the internal academic entrepreneur in my lab. So I've tried to invest in people not only outside my lab, certainly, and I'm super lucky, but also even in my lab to try to lead technologies out. But no, I've been very lucky, and it's been kind of really I've learned so much from working with these entrepreneurs.
We have an audience question that I think it fits here. It says, what are the most significant challenges you see for successfully, and they put in operative word here, getting your technologies adopted by the marketplace?
I feel like, talking to you guys, I feel like you probably have more developed answers than I do to this, but for in the New York ecosystem for so many ways. But personally, I felt that certainly when I start off as an early as a young faculty, and also in New York as where it was at the time, and maybe still is to some extent, I've talked to the venture capital, and I think there's been more opportunities with them moving in here, and that's been great. But for me, the way that it's gone, it didn't go. I so far haven't gone lucky enough to go the venture model and really find to start a technology from being able to talk to a venture capital firm and getting that investment right away. So we've really, I guess what they call is bootstrapped it. And that's been through it's been through finding excellent people. And New York is definitely not an easy place to find early stage entrepreneur who's willing to take a technology and take a big risk, and really the people that take these technologies from my lab or I work with, they're not getting a salary because there's no investment there yet, and they have to go find it. And I do my best to work with them so that they can get investment in these technologies. And so being able to find those people have been, I think, for me, the biggest bottleneck. I have at least 2-3 other technologies that were waiting for someone to come to me and say, hey, I would love to be a CEO and take this technology, and I don't need a salary right off the bat.
Great audience for this.
So if anybody's out there like to talk, let's do this. Because I think
contact details in the chat, everyone.
Because early stage entrepreneurs, biotech entrepreneurs in New York City have been hard to come by, especially ones that don't need to be paid. So that's understandably so.
Yeah.
And so, but when you can find the right person, they can, and they do enough work with you, and you have the right relationship. Oftentimes, things can really can build out, and things can get companies can get funded, and technologies can make it to clinical trials in the market.
Yeah, I think we've made incredibly significant strides addressing the lab space issue, right? We have a number of just world-class now incubators here within the city, and more coming online and more space coming online. And one thing that it just takes time is to build this, as I've characterized it, flywheel of entrepreneurs that do it, exit, do it again, do it, exit, do it again, right? And we're not there yet, but we're headed in the right direction, and that unfortunately just takes time.
Yeah, they say in Boston, not to make the comparison to Boston, Derek, but now that there's kind of so many companies that have gone through the full cycle and exited, that there's just a pool of talent there that even when something fails, well, then those people get scooped up by the next place. And here, someone said, well, there just haven't been enough failures here that we've been able to find enough people to do that. Of course, some people also say, well, it would be great if there were some biotech firms that really showed that massive win has happened here. And so I'm trying.
I think we're going to get there. I think we've had a number of things over the years that may have seemed smaller at the time, but I think are actually really important. So if we rewind the clock a little bit, I would say the two institutional funds that kind of came in from the outside were the Accelerator Corp and Versant Ventures. And between David Schubert and Carlo Rizzuto, they established themselves here with really kind of a personal effort. And then they had associates, Jonathan Mandelbaum and Cameron Pitt, who were actually coming in and really kind of digging around within these institutions. And I think more venture firms started to do that, and it builds on itself. And now you have now Deerfield, who has done all of these deals within academia. Now they're building out their own building where their startups are going to be housed. So all of these things have built on each other that you can't point to them as being big yet, but after we have what I think are the inevitable big exits here or there, big wins, we're going to look around and point to the things that are big and remember that they didn't seem quite so big when they started like that. So I think we're well on our way, and I think we can tick off the names and the people that are really good bets to be what I think will be great second generation CEOs after being good first generation CEOs. So I think I really feel like we're going to get there. So if you look at where you are now and you look kind of around your department and around at Sloan Kettering, do you see kind of a difference in the way that faculty look at either external collaborations or looking for venture funding or collaboration with industry? Do you think that has also subsequently shifted into kind of a more open posture out of academia?
I think so. Well, certainly, I think that's been happening. Say again, to compare to Boston, that definitely felt like it was happening in Boston. Although I realized I was never a professor in Boston, so now going back there, it might feel differently. But it felt like there was at least a good set of people who were really, I think led by Bob, had this academic entrepreneur model, and that had kind of perfected it and had a lot of or have a lot of collaborations with industry, and would start companies right out of their lab and find the right have the right set of connections to build companies and to figure out the right place for their technology to go once they found that they made something that really had legs. Here, I feel like it's been growing, and there's definitely other academic entrepreneurs that I can name here, and I think many people know, that are building technologies and really having those kind of collaborations with industry and building their own startups in New York. And I feel that that there's definitely been some recognition that is a direction, and if someone if a lab makes a technology here, they certainly there's some still some people that don't really know where to go, or kind of feel like, and plenty of people that are totally fine being very basic scientists and don't really want to take their stuff out of the lab in some sort of non-academic way. But for people that are thinking that way, or might have found a cancer target or something where they realize, okay, well, people realize at some point, nobody's going to take this out of the lab except me, unless I really take the initiative to find a way for this technology to go somewhere, or this discovery to go somewhere. In this area, we have the Tri-Institutional Therapeutic Discovery Institute that was built as a collaboration between the three institutions here: Rockefeller, Weill Cornell, and Sloan Kettering. And that's done an excellent job. When someone has a target, that someone found some sort of protein target, a druggable target in their lab, and now that institution or that institute can make a drug, to make a potential therapeutic. And that they do both small molecules and antibody drugs, and hopefully we'll build more. And then there's
love that collaboration.
Oh yeah, that's been
I absolutely love that collaboration.
Being able to have a tri-institutional type of collaboration here, and hopefully there'll be, we can get tetra, and we can go all the way up the numerals here, so that these academic centers can can do so much collaboratively that they any one on their own couldn't do. And certainly some are doing some excellent things on their own, but it's just amazing. So I've been working with the Weill Cornell has its BioVenture Entrepreneurship Lab that I'm the academic director of, and which really means that I'm the academic liaison. The real person running that is Jahan Ali, and that was the center was started by Larry Schlossman at Weill Cornell, and they realized that if there's some sort of academic incubator that can do things like entrepreneurship mentoring, can work with faculty, and they do everything from SBIR workshops, teaching young faculty how to write a small business grant, to mentoring teams that could potentially build a technology and start a startup. And they also run this class that I started when I was here. It used to be called Bench to Bedside. Now it's called Accelerating BioVenture Innovation, which is basically a kind of, it was really a couple students, Nick Biomet and Sarah Kishineski at the time. They were grad students here. They started this venture capital club before I had gotten here in 2012. And they realized, well, if they could bring in a few people from the New York area that understood entrepreneurship and IP law and the different areas, market strategy, they could create a little course with external teachers and instructors, and they could then get people to try to practice how to build a pitch, start a team, take a technology, and pitch it to investors. And they started as a club. They found me, well, they found my department head, Dave Scheinberg, who found me, and I said, "We want to start this as a class." And I said, "Great, that's amazing. That's kind of like the venture competition, the MIT 100K competition, but in a nutshell, and really started as a class here." And so that's been just amazing to see what students and now faculty, postdocs, medical residents, kind of this whole ecosystem of people starting really from the academic basic student side, to teach them, to kind of give them a crash course of entrepreneurship, and then have them take technologies from, so far, mostly the tri-institutions. Oftentimes inventors come into this class and have their IP, and then they say, well, what can we do? How do we learn how to build a business plan and do all those entrepreneurial things that could potentially bring it out to investors. And so now under this BioVenture Entrepreneurship Lab, Jahan and under her Connor have been doing this several times now, and it's been starting companies. And actually, all the companies that I've started or have come spun out of my lab have been really they've gotten to where they are because of this class and this kind of networking opportunity, where Arthur Klausner was a judge in this competition and mentor, and he actually the first technology to come out of my lab, Goldilocks Therapeutics, now under Arthur. At the time, I think in 2015, it was a team in the class. It wasn't called Goldilocks because it wasn't. He made that name, but he was the judge when that technology came into this class, and and he judged it as the judging panel judged it as the first prize winner, and I think the prize was really a few bucks to like have dinner at the time. But but 2 years later, Arthur found me and or Arthur talked to me and had recently sold his recent company, and said, are things going, and do you have any technologies that you're really excited about in your lab? And I said, remember that technology that you thought was the winner? Well, now we have some efficacy data now, which we didn't have then. Maybe you'd like to take another look at it. And he did his due diligence, and that was really just a building relationships, and this kind of entrepreneurship ecosystem is a miniature ecosystem here. But I feel like whatever I can do to rise all the boats in New York City, we can, and even and certainly in this area. And so that's been seeing some successes. Certainly, I think getting more collaboration between these institutions and the other institutions in New York City could really do a lot. If there was something like the MIT 100K competition, which is really kind of like a Boston 100K competition, if there was one in New York that could really bring a lot of eyes here and investor eyes here, I think that could do a lot.
What, I would be remiss if I didn't point out, one of the things that NewYorkBIO does to support early stage companies is we have a fellows membership, which I believe Goldilocks takes advantage of that. And basically it is free membership for up to 2 years for startup companies. And so we offer all of our programming and leverage discounts on our, VWR lab supplies and things like HR with, but so that's one way that we can help early stage companies. And so we're always looking for other ways. So any suggestions?
Definitely what you're doing, and I think also the New York EDC, but you guys are certainly leading this ecosystem in the right direction. So I thank you guys.
One of the things that happens when you get places like the BioVentures program and other programs like that, you get ideas that are then socialized and discussed and analyzed by more and more people, and they get seen by the judges. They get talked about in different forums. And if we didn't have those, they would still be ideas in someone's head. And kind of the secondary effect here is you have more people talking about more ideas, and they're not all going to be great. Not every opportunity is going to be the one that people should go and turn into a company, but you change the way that people talk about things, you change the way that people think about things, and you kind of get people that are going to ask better questions. And by raising that level of what I'll call academic curiosity and really analysis, it's very easy to have an idea and tell yourself that this is a great idea and never stress test it against anything else. But I do it all the time, but when you actually go and do it and let other people in, I think that's really productive. And I think it's kind of a hidden benefit of whether it's Accelerating BioVentures, whether it's Columbia's biomedics program, NYU has the creative destruction labs. They have all of these programs that are, I think, elevating the discourse around things that could be. And the more you do that, I think we're going to get more things that are, right? And again, I think the groundswell is moving in the right direction, right? Even this year, we've seen a few more funds get established that are looking at early stage innovation and are going to be, if not company formation funds, Series A funds. So I can talk all day about how I'm confident in New York, but I think if NewYorkBIO can give a voice and amplify people like you and help people like you find people like that, then everybody's going to be in a really good spot.
Agreed.
You just have to keep building things that people want and are going to solve a lot of problems.
That's I could say that's easy to do, but no, that's not easy to do. There's so many academics here that are really doing just amazing work, and I feel like being in a medical center, especially in Manhattan, nobody's and really any lab in Manhattan maybe, nobody's lab can be super huge and you can take over the world with it and feel like you're this kind of fiefdom. I feel like everybody and especially at a medical center, nobody's saying I alone can cure, X, Y, Z. Everybody realizes that collaboration is key academically, and many people realize, and many collaborations with industry have been so instrumental here. And certainly this institution has developed some amazing set of drugs that have cured, have treated so many people and cured diseases. So the people working at the bench and just toiling away, and also leading the biomedicine is just amazing. And so people really collaborate so much. My lab is this whole building really that I work in is an open lab space concept, where you walk another step past one bench that some of my people are at, and there's another lab there. And just that seamless ability to talk to people and collaborate has been just so invigorating. And it makes you realize, it makes you remember, not that you need to be remembered, it needs to be reminded every day that you really don't have all the answers, and but through collaboration and investigation, there's just so much more can happen. And just being able to bring together some amazing minds to think about a problem has been, just really definitely the much more than some of their parts.
Yeah, and it's interesting because New York has long obviously been the finance capital, frankly, of certainly the Western world. But we also have this amazing collection of academic medical centers, which you're certainly a part. And then we also have this wonderfully diverse population, which makes a lot of sense when you're looking at clinical trials and other work with patient advocacy groups, to really look at what sits here. Our resources go beyond just benches, right? It includes all of the things we need to really bring cures.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay, we have a very important question because we almost missed this and broke our streak. But really quickly, COVID, how has it affected your lab? How has it affected the way that you've been doing things? And how has it affected the way you're going to do things in the future? It's a lightning round. We're running out of time. You got to go.
All right, quick. So the labs here closed in March. We had about 2 to 3 months of where we were all working from home, and really no lab work could happen. And I think that allowed, at least personally, for my lab, I think a lot of students were able to get to start writing their theses and really give them time to think. And so there was a silver lining to be able to do that. And really, I think that overall people have, people realize that, you maybe if they knew before, they know more now, that you really just can't look at the lab bench and pipette all day. You have to think. You have to have the time to think about your research, but also you have to think about the wider world, because so much that's happened over the last year, and be cognizant of other people and how their lives are, and how and mental health, and so I feel like there's been some degree of awakening in academia about certainly about disparities, about race, about and then about just being able to, we talk about essential workers, and that that my lab was able to close, and this institution was able to stop work, but so many people weren't. And so that might be in a nutshell, but so many small parts of many things. But I think it really made people think a lot.
Dan, thank you so much. This conversation was amazing. And we look forward to continuing it with you, as well as all of the companies that you're spinning out of your lab. Thanks to TriNet for sponsoring our discussion today. And we hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Right. Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.